welcome back. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dan Barr from RMIT on research integrity. Yeah, I mentioned before around your involvement both in organizations like the WCRI and in Asia Pacific as well with APEC. Mm-hmm. I'm keen to hear a little bit more around the projects, the APEC project in particular. Could you give us a quick summary of what that involves and what you hope to come out of that project?
The Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation is a collection of really diverse, what they term economies across the Asia Pacific, across North Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, Latin America, North America. Groups within the APEC identified that there was, a lack or an absence of a shared understanding of the principles of research integrity, and that actually may affect things such as collaboration and exchange across the APEC. In particular, researcher mobility. So the idea of having a harmonized or at least shared understanding of honest and trustworthy research would help facilitate the movement of researchers across and between APEC economies, across boundaries throughout APEC. This is interesting. I think there is a perceived issue here. People have found or argued that the principles of research integrity underpin the positive impact of research, which they do. They underpin practices, responsible practices, which they do. There are also arguments to say that the principles of research integrity underpin excellent research, really, really high quality research. And we've seen in other activities from the Montreal Statement or others, for example, activities to say research integrity is really important in collaboration. Researcher mobility hadn't been described in this way, but it's an interesting issue. To address this, we're privileged to do research and undertake consultation and other processes to come up with a consensus set of guiding principles for research integrity across APEC. These shared principles are fairly high level, but then are used to inform certain practices for researchers and administrators, and also funders. The principles are honesty, responsibility, transparency, rigour, fairness, respect, and diversity. And diversity was the one that perhaps there isn't necessarily consensus around, but it's a very interesting one, a principle that recognises the great diversity across APEC economies and the research sectors, and the need for recognising that so that all the research could be trusted and the conduct could be trusted. So we went through a research process to develop this consensus, and those are the principles recently been at least drafted, and we're looking to then use these in a document that's not binding, but that can then be used across APEC to help with research mobility and other initiatives such as policy or education and training.
What do you see, talking about research mobility, do you see there being in future potentially some kind of passport or kind of credential that a researcher can undertake that will be recognized across either the region or even the world, to say, okay, this is someone who's undertaken research integrity training, or some evidence of practice with integrity? Is that something that you see being possible?
I think it'd be a great possibility for the APEC work, that project, because those principles define what research integrity is. And so if you have an understanding or awareness of that, and that understanding is relatively shared across various economies or boundaries or places, then an indicator or marker of that understanding, it should be powerful. I mean, universities within Australia have shared resources or approached similar education and training modules and solutions in research integrity, and try to certainly do that with some shared way, so that we could say, well, someone at my institution has done the same training you've done, you provide, and so that should add confidence, that should add and build trust. Certainly the APEC guiding principles for research integrity, they could underpin that, and APEC has been very successful in certainly helping with mobility and exchange in the economic sense, and why wouldn't that then occur in a research or researcher sense. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it seems to me as well have a lot of value, and especially with education becoming more and more global, and you know, the desire for universities to attract, I think, competition for universities to attract researchers, that you know, some kind of model that enables integrity to be upheld would be advantageous, I would think.
Well, yeah. We'll think about what other markers are there.
Yeah.
So you've published a paper.
Yeah.
You from a prestigious institution. You seem like a really wonderful person. There probably aren't any direct markers.
No. And as we saw with the Swinburne case recently, right?
Right.
Where, that was something that happened previously, but obviously there'd been wasn't aware when Swinburne hired the person. So.
Right. You know, these are important considerations. I think increasingly institutions are putting into their considerations of how do they want to serve their communities or through research. So how do they want to solve the great problems, or how do they want to engage with industry? How do they want to do basic research? What's the best way? Well, research integrity and the principles for research integrity apply to all research, regardless of the scope or discipline area. So why wouldn't we have some direct markers that people understand them and have some training?
And you could look at a university as well for some markers.
Yeah, you certainly could.
Okay, so my last question, and I guess you can take this two ways, so I'll kind of post the question and you can run with it. But do you think, we've spoken before about, is there enough importance at a high level of either government or universities around research integrity? So I guess the open question is, do you think there is, or where do you see things standing in terms of research integrity as a priority? And if you think more needs to be done, or it needs to be raised as a priority, what can be done about it? How can universities put more onus on research integrity? And how can the community as a whole, I think, not just because it's not just up to the universities, it's up to the researchers as well, right? The individual. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, they're doing the heavy lifting. It's an interesting question. I guess it's a question that actually lacks evidence. For example, how seriously do institutions or researchers, for example, across Australia, take research integrity? Anecdotally, they appear to take it very seriously. So both, when I say they, I mean both researchers and also institutions, representatives of institutions. They speak passionately about it. They support it to a certain degree. They sometimes don't articulate it in the way that would suggest that we're all going in the same direction or approaching it from the same way. But so there are some issues there. So what could we do? We could try and understand if it is a priority and why it isn't. Clearly, it should be if we're wishing to deliver impact through research. The positive impact of research is dependent on research integrity, and research that lacks integrity can lead to very negative research impact. So very, very harmful things for the society or economics or for the environment. So what could we do? I mean, other places around the world, other communities or countries have gotten networks together, very successful ones within the Netherlands, within Japan, that from their very initial inception tapped into this obvious latent interest and need, this unmet challenge for researchers, for administrators, academic leaders, students, others to get together to talk about research integrity, to better define their understanding of it, but also to develop not only solutions, but as you mentioned, advocacy. It's interesting, I think, for institutions, there are lots of things pulling them in different directions for research. And the environment's really complex and a global one. We're not measuring research integrity really, or the responsible conduct of research really directly anywhere. And typically you get what you measure. There's a lot of measurement. There's measurements of individuals, there's measurements of institutions within research that appear to be markers of or indicators of activity or quality. And you could say with a fair amount of confidence that we're not measuring direct indicators for trustworthy research or essentially research integrity at a researcher or at a institution level. There has been some activity around this, especially in looking at journals and publishers. Certainly some very, very smart and innovative work looking at how you might measure researchers. Some of that work was recently done at the World Conference on Research Integrity in Hong Kong, which was co-organised by RMIT with HKU. And then you get to institutions. And for Australia, where one of our biggest exporters is education, and there are lots of rankings of universities for example, research activity or other academic indicators of quality or success, none of those really are measuring indicators of trustworthy research or research integrity. I mean, how would you do that? You might look at whether there are policies for research integrity within institutions. You might then have to look at the quality of those. You may look at retractions. You might look at very, very simple bibliometric indicators that suggest institutions are being responsible for correcting the literature. And when I say you might look at retractions within a ranking of an institution, retractions would be a positive thing. Mm-hmm. Exactly what this looks like, we don't know yet, but some research that I'm very passionate about doing, and I'm sure that would be informed greatly by some activities that have been done recently around the world, including at the World Conference.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had Phil Beatty on from Times Higher Rankings recently, and we discussed the idea of, do you see integrity rankings coming? And he wasn't totally against it, so maybe there's an opportunity for them to expand into that field as well. I think, as you say, it's a hard thing to measure for sure.
Yep.
But they seem to be measuring out everything else at universities, so why not try to measure that as well? I guess I think it's like you say, unless you're really measuring something or finding out the scale of it, then how do you know what the solution is, right? How do you know? I think it ties into other themes, for example, with contract cheating and things. Obviously a hot topic in Australia as well. If there's not an understanding of how major the issue is, then it's not going to be raised as a first step. But then you don't know, how do you solve something if you don't know how it's happening, where it's happening, and whether to uphold it.
So I mean, that's true for education and training solutions. There was a really nice Cochrane review by a number of authors, very well-established experts in research integrity, that found there's almost no evidence to support the education, training, and research integrity prevents breaches. The only thing that looks like it works are training approaches to prevent plagiarism, so academic writing skills. And it's true too. I mean, why would you build a ranking where you potentially generate competitive environment for research integrity, which could be a very good thing for trustworthy research? Maybe a more meaningful and less cynical approach would be at least to, as you say, measure certain characteristics of what we think research integrity in institutions or the responsible environments, the best environments for responsible research in institutions look like. Measure those and build at least some program or systematic way of supporting research institutions to achieve that. And that might be done through something similar to an accreditation program, which again is strange that we don't have that yet. This is a global problem, a global issue, and a global opportunity. Understanding research integrity, putting initiatives in place to support it can only benefit great research.
Definitely, and through that benefit society as a whole, I think, for sure. Okay, I mean, I think, we've, over the past few years, as I've got to understand research integrity more and your work more, I do definitely feel like, a lot of time and effort and money has been spent educating undergraduate students around academic integrity and things, and there has been maybe a bit less focus from the community at large around research, and I hope I think it is starting to change now. And I think the work that you're doing, others are doing, and the profile of the WCRI and other organisations that, I hope if we're sat down together in another 2 years, that we'll have seen a lot of progress and a lot more attention being paid to it. So I look forward to inviting you on again and updating the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that episode, and we'll see you again soon.